My father looked across the boardroom table and calmly announced that the entire $80 billion company would belong to my brother. Then he pointed toward the door and told me to leave the family business forever. My mother smiled beside him, convinced I had finally lost. What none of them understood was that the deal they were celebrating could not happen without something I legally owned. 8 years earlier, our company was nothing like the massive business sitting before that beer. I was the quiet daughter who spent most of her time in the engineering lab while my older brother Grant handled investors and public appearances. My father Robert negotiated deals, my mother Linda managed our image, and Grant became the face everyone remembered. I never cared about applause. I cared about making the technology work. At 27, I built the first working version of an automation system that could react to unexpected obstacles without shutting down. I still remember sitting alone in the lab after midnight, staring at the machine while it finally completed the test. I was exhausted and covered in coffee stains, but I knew he had something special. Grant presented it at an industry event, and our family suddenly had investors asking questions. I expected him to mention my name when someone asked who created the system. Instead, Grant smiled and gave a polished explanation that made the invention sound like a family achievement. Later, Mom told me Grant was simply better at handling attention and reminded me that I never enjoyed being on stage. I accepted that explanation because I trusted my family. Soon, a pattern formed that I did not recognize as dangerous. I built the technology, Grant presented it, Dad negotiated the contracts, and Mom created the perfect family story around everything. But there was one detail they had overlooked. Before the company ever sold products using my invention, I had developed the original system independently with my own equipment and savings. I had protected the core patents personally, while giving the company broad rights to use the technology. For years, that arrangement seemed harmless. Then Grant began attending private meetings about a possible acquisition, while my invitations slowly disappeared. One evening, I opened a document Dad had called routine paperwork and found a sentence requiring my written approval before the patents could transfer to a new owner. I read it several times before realizing what was happening. They were preparing to sell an $80 billion company without owning the technology that made it valuable. Dad asked me to sign immediately. He called it a simple legal cleanup and warned me not to make the process difficult. Mom later called and said Grant needed this opportunity more than I did. I refused both of them and contacted my longtime financial advisor, Aaron. He told me not to sign anything until an independent attorney reviewed every document. I thought he was protecting me, until I found him having dinner with Grant. Aaron admitted that Grant had offered him a senior position if the acquisition succeeded. I left that restaurant feeling betrayed all over again. But his betrayal also pushed me toward the person I actually needed. Attorney Valerie Morgan reviewed my agreements and explained the situation clearly. My family could sell its shares, buildings, contracts, equipment, and brand, but the core patents remained mine. Without my consent, the beer could not receive them. Instead of warning my family, I stayed quiet. I wanted to see what they would do when they believed I was still the obedient daughter who would eventually give in. The answer came quickly. Dad offered me $50,000 to resign, sign the patent transfer, waive future claims, and disappear quietly. I stared at the agreement and asked whether they seriously valued my patents at $50,000. Dad became angry and accused me of believing the company revolved around me. I rejected the offer through Valerie. After that, my family started damaging my reputation inside the business. People were told I was overwhelmed, emotional, and difficult under pressure. Then came the family gala celebrating the upcoming acquisition. Grant embarrassed one of our engineers in front of guests, and when I defended her, he deliberately spilled red wine across my clothes. Mom quietly asked me not to cause a scene. I went to the restroom and looked at myself in the mirror while the wine soaked through my jacket. For years, I had made excuses for every insult because I believed protecting my family was part of being loyal. That night, I finally understood that loyalty had become an excuse they used to control me. I called Valerie and told her I was finished protecting people who were willing to destroy me. From that point forward, every conversation went through my attorney. We preserved emails, financial records, access logs, messages, and documents connected to the acquisition. The beer was formally informed that I had never approved the transfer of my patents. Still, Dad pushed ahead as though $80 billion had made him untouchable. Then the final boardroom meeting arrived, and my entire family believed they were about to win. Dad stood at the head of the table and announced that all $80 billion would go to Grant. He then looked at me and ordered me to leave because I was no longer part of the family business. I asked the question nobody expected. I asked whether they had actually sold the company without my patents. Mom laughed and said they had sold their business. Across the table, the buyer's attorney suddenly stopped writing. He slowly closed the folder and stood up. The transaction had not closed, he explained. No money had been released because the ownership issue surrounding the core technology remained unresolved. Dad looked at me in disbelief, while Grant immediately accused me of sabotaging the family. Valerie calmly placed the licensing agreement and patent records on the table. The documents showed exactly what I had known for years. The technology was mine. Grant insisted that the invention belonged to the company because I had developed it there. Valerie answered with dated filings, development records, purchase receipts, and ownership documents proving otherwise. Dad tried to call it a family disagreement, but Valerie placed the $50,000 severance agreement in front of the beer. It showed that my family had attempted to make my resignation and patent transfer conditions of my departure. The room became completely silent. Then another problem surfaced. After I refused to cooperate, Grant had arranged for an outside contractor to investigate ways of accessing systems connected to technology he did not control. The contractor eventually stopped, hired legal representation, and agreed to cooperate after realizing there was a legitimate ownership dispute. There was no need for a dramatic confession. The emails, invoices, payments, and access records already told the story. The beer ended the meeting, the acquisition was terminated, and the $80 billion my family had already mentally divided between themselves never arrived. Grant sat frozen while Dad stared at me as if I had stolen something from him. I had done nothing except refuse to sign away property that belonged to me. For the first time in 8 years, my family had to face the consequences of decisions they had made without me. The fallout came slowly, investors backed away, lenders demanded answers, and the company had to explain why its most valuable technology could not be transferred as promised. Dad eventually resigned after legal disputes and financial pressure mounted. Grant lost his position, while my mother struggled to control the story as facts began appearing in official records. People stopped calling me difficult and started asking why my family had tried to force me out. Months later, Aaron asked to meet. He admitted that he had chosen the deal because he was afraid of being left behind. I accepted his apology, but I did not restore the friendship. Trust had been broken, and I had finally learned that forgiveness did not require giving someone another opportunity to betray me. Around that same time, I began building a smaller company where engineers received clear ownership rights for their work. I carried my old blue notebook into our first major presentation. It contained the rough sketches of the invention that had started everything, including pages stained by years of coffee and late nights. I no longer needed it to prove anything. I carried it because it reminded me of the person I had been before my family taught me to doubt my own value. That quiet engineer had built something nobody could take from her. Almost a year later, my mother contacted me because Dad was struggling with medical expenses. She asked for financial help, and I decided to verify the bills before doing anything. I paid the essential medical costs directly, but I did not send cash or reopen the relationship. I could care about their well-being without giving them access to my life again. That distinction became one of the most important